In this video we'll take a look at how the detail view for the product list is implemented using a ViewBox. So you can see that when we scroll on the list and then we tap on a row, we switch to a panel that shows the detail view for the particular product, and this detail view over here has been implemented using a ViewBox control. So let's go now behind the scenes and take a look at how this was done. So first of all we'll go to the products list and we'll open up the builder. And if we open up the list events, we'll see that in the on-click event, what we're going to do here is get a pointer to the ViewBox control. And then what we're going to do is get the data from the currently selected row in the list control. So this dot selection data is the data that is currently selected, and since there can be multiple rows selected in a list control if the list control allows multiple selections, which in this case it doesn't, the this.selection data is an array, and so therefore we need to basically take the first item in the array, which is 0. So this.selection data is the data from the current row in the list. You can read more help about this selection data in this more help icon over there. So once we get a pointer to the detail view ViewBox, then we get the data for the current row in the list, and then we go ahead and we populate the detail view, and then we set focus to the detail panel card. But we also, you can see here, set two properties in the ViewBox. We set a property called quantity and a property called service. So we set that property to 1, which is the number, which is the quantity that will be added to the shopping cart if the user selects the item and adds it to the shopping cart, and service, which is a logical field which indicates whether the user wants service or not when they add the item to the product card. So the difference between quantity and service and the rest of the data that is being used to populate the ViewBox is that that these two fields don't come from the data that is in the list control. These are two separate properties that are stored in the ViewBox, and then the rest of the data that is displayed in the ViewBox is coming from the current row in the list control. So now if we go over to the ViewBox itself, we can see that the ViewBox basically uses a layout template which is very similar to the layout template that was used in the list control. You can also see here that the data source for the ViewBox here has been set to static JSON, and we've put in some sample static JSON. Now we only did this so that when we were in design mode designing the ViewBox, we actually had some data to work with. Of course, at runtime we're not going to be using this static data that has been inserted into the ViewBox control. Instead we're going to be using the static data that gets injected into the ViewBox when the user taps on a row in the list control. So let's go now back to the layout, and we can see that the layout, as mentioned, uses a template that is very similar to the template used in the list control, with a few notable exceptions. So first of all, notice that the star rating is done in the exact same way using that star method, and that the star method is defined over here as well. So basically this rating method over here in the ViewBox is identical to the rating method that was defined in the list control. And since this method is identical in both the list and the view, we could have moved it out of the controls themselves and into a JavaScript global function. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now looking at how a ViewBox control was used to implement the detail view for the product list control. So let's go back now to the layouts, and we can see that that inside the layout over here we have two buttons. Actually, I think we have three buttons. We have a quantity button, an add to cart button, and then we also have a service button, which allows you to select whether the item will come with service when you add it to the shopping cart. So let's take a look at how, for example, the quantity button is implemented. So if we look at the quantity button over here, we see it has a class called quantity button, but it also has an A5 item called quantity. So the A5 item is how you define the event handler for the button. Similarly, the add to cart button has an A5 item called add to cart, and if we look here for the service button, we'll see here's the service button, which has an A5 item of service. So these three A5 items, service, quantity, and add to cart, are defined in the items section of the ViewBox, and this is where we specify the event handler. So when we go over to items, we can see the three buttons that the three items that implement the actions. So let's go through each one of these. So the first one we'll look at is add to cart. So when we click on add to cart, we can see that what we're going to do is we're going to get a pointer to the list control that contains the shopping cart, and then we're going to append a new row to that list control, and then we're going to set focus to the panel that contains the list control. But the data that gets injected into that new row in the list control comes from this variable D over here, and this variable D here is a combination of the original data from the list that was used to populate the detail view, and also the quantity and setting for service and the service price. So those three variables, which are added into the shopping cart list, are not part of the ViewBox's actual data. In fact, those are actually ViewBox properties that were set when the ViewBox was initially populated. So let's quickly go back to the list control now and take a look at the on-click event here. You can see that in the on-click event, we're setting the initial value of the quantity property to 1 and the service property to false. So these are two properties now of the ViewBox control. So now let's go back to the ViewBox itself and go back to the add to cart event handler. So you can see here that when we construct this data array, the data array is an object that has data from the ViewBox data. So all of the data from the ViewBox data starts with this dot data. So this dot data title, this dot data price, etc. So these items came from the product list, which was then used to populate the ViewBox. But then you can see later on over here we've got this dot quantity. So this dot quantity is not part of the ViewBox data. Quantity is just a property of the ViewBox that was initialized when the ViewBox was populated. The same thing is true of service. This is a property of the ViewBox. So we're setting the quantity value in the array that is being used to populate the products, the shopping cart list with this property, etc. So when we tap the button to add to the quantity, what we're doing is we're modifying the value of this property over here. So let's pause now and continue in the next video. So next we're going to take a look at the quantity item. So let's go back and quickly run the component again and see what happens when we press on the quantity button. So when we tap on a row in the list, we get to see the detail view, which is the ViewBox, and then in the ViewBox we have a button here called quantity, which currently shows 1. So when we tap on this button over here, we give focus to a different panel which contains a list control where we can choose the quantity. So I'll go there and set the quantity to 3, and you can see now that the button has updated. So what was happening when I pressed this button over there, you can see that we have a panel over here that contains an editor set, and this editor set contains a list control which is used to edit the quantity selected. This list control over here is also used to specify whether service is required or not. So let's go back now to the detail view and look at the quantity button. So we can see that what the quantity button does is, first of all, creates an array that has has 20 entries in it. So these are the available quantities. So the assumption here is that a user is never going to order more than 20 of a particular item. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call the editor from value method, which opens up editor 1 in editor set 1. So when we open up editor 1 in editor set 1, we're going to automatically give focus to the panel card that contains that editor, and then we're going to basically set the editor's value to this dot quantity, so that's the current quantity, and we're going to basically then also pass in an object called list.list, which is the which is a settings property which is used to populate the list editor, and then this is the function that is called when the when an item is selected in the editor list. So if we go now to the editor itself, so we'll go now to the editor and we'll go here into the, I believe it's set value in editor. You can see that what we're going to do is we're going to take the settings.list property, which was passed in by the set value in editor method, and we're going to use that to populate this list control. So this list control now will show 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., the available quantities that the user can select. So if we go here now and we run the component, so we'll click on a row to give focus to the detail view, and then we'll click on a quantity. So this is going to give focus to the editor panel card and populate this list with the available choices. Then if we go back now and we click on the service button, this is going to also basically give focus to the same editor panel card, and this is the exact same list here, but this time we've populated the list with a different set of choices. So the same editor is being used, this same editor over here, with the list control over here, is being used to edit both the quantity and the service properties in the ViewBox. So then finally, going back to the ViewBox control here, we see service, and service is very similar to the quantity field in that basically it calls the editor from value method, and this time the settings that are used to populate the list are defined over here. So basically we define these two rows in the list, and then we populate the list, the editor list. So what we've shown over here is how the detail view is used to display the detail for the currently selected product in the product list, and then how the detail view implements the buttons that add products to the shopping cart.